The Rules Committee will come to order. We are here for consideration of H.R. 1540, the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2012 conference report. We're very happy to welcome a distinguished chair and ranking member of the Committee on Armed Services. And gentlemen, thanks very much for being with us. Congratulations on your work product. And let me say that it looks like you have beautifully prepared remarks there. You can enter those into the record, and we would welcome your summary.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chairman Breyer, Ranking Member Slaughter. I appreciate the opportunity to testify before you this afternoon. I especially want to thank all of those who have worked so hard to get the bill to this point, our 2012 National Defense Authorization. In particular, I'd like to thank my partner, Adam Smith, Ranking Member from the state of Washington. We have worked hard on this bill in a bipartisan way.
I used to be able to control those, but we had a change here. And I used to be able to hit this switch here and turn it on so that we didn't have to bother our distinguished panel.
So you could shut me off whenever you wanted.
That was the other option that I had, too. But notice in this room you can hear pretty well even without the microphone.
As you know, the NDAA is the key mechanism by which the Congress fulfills its primary constitutional responsibility to provide for the common defense. And this year will mark the 50th consecutive year that we've completed our work. The NDAA passed out of the Armed Services Committee with a vote of 60-1, and it passed the full House by a wide margin of 322 to 96. Likewise, the Senate adopted its version of the bill by a vote of 93-7. It is a bipartisan product from start to finish with a wide base of support. Nevertheless, the members of the House Armed Services Committee overcame significant obstacles to deliver a conference report this year. The Senate passed its bill less than 2 weeks ago. But in spite of the exceptionally short time available to us, we've negotiated a conference report that everyone can be proud of, and we did it using regular order. Another challenge we overcame relates to the significant changes in funding that the military has experienced this year. The bill's authorization levels have been reduced to comply with the Budget Control Act. The bill would bring the total authorized funding for national defense to $554 billion for the base budget and $115.5 billion for overseas contingency operations. This includes $530 billion for the DoD and $11.1 billion for the Department of Energy's National Nuclear Security Administration. And this represents a $19 billion reduction from last year's authorization. However, what makes our bill such an important piece of legislation are the vital authorities contained within. Our bill provides for pay and benefits for our military and their families, as well as the authorities they need to continue prosecuting the war on terrorism. In addition, we include landmark pieces of legislation sanctioning the Central Bank of Iran and strengthening policies and procedures used to detain, interrogate, and prosecute al-Qaeda, the Taliban, affiliated groups, and those who substantially support them. However, I must be crystal clear on this point. The provisions do not extend any new authorities to detain U.S. citizens and explicitly exempt U.S. citizens from provisions related to military custody of terrorists. Noting the strategic challenges associated with the rising China, the conference report takes concrete steps to ensure that the United States is fully prepared to defend our vital interests. We support a full array of modernization efforts across our military services, including key missile defense programs and cooperation with Israel, more than doubling the President's request for Israeli missile defense. Through a bipartisan effort, we've been able to fully fund the National Security Administration's $7.6 billion to support its nuclear deterrent modernization plans. Maintaining this nation's deterrent is important for the security of our homeland and our allies. This represents only a snapshot of the conference report, but I hope it captures the significance of this legislation. Thank you for the opportunity to testify this afternoon and for helping us move this report to the House for a vote. In order to move the conference report through the House expeditiously, I request an appropriate rule waiving all points of order against the conference report and against its consideration. I also ask that the rule provide for 1 hour of general debate. I'd be pleased to answer any questions after.
Thank you very much, Mr. McKeon. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with the remarks of the chairman. I think he did an excellent job of summarizing the bill. I, too, want to thank him and his staff for working so closely together on this. I always say the Armed Services Committee is the most bipartisan committee in Congress.
Next to the Rules Committee.
Yeah. Okay. I'm in your committee. So I don't really have anything to add except I think we should pass this bill. I think it's a good work product, and I thank both staffs for their extraordinary work in pulling this together, particularly in such a tight time frame.
Well, thank you very much for that, and thanks to both of you for your hard work. And again, we're seeking bipartisanship in a wide range of areas on the floor. We're seeking bipartisanship right now on the measure that's before us, and obviously when we get the conference report from your committee to the floor, I'm sure it'll enjoy strong bipartisan support as well. So I have no questions, but again, appreciate your effort here. Mr. Sessions.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much, and congratulations to both of you for not only your work in getting this bill to us, but also your hard work, as always, on behalf of this body, to the men and women of the United States military and their families. I was very hopeful, Mr. Chairman, that I would be able to congratulate the conference for a job well done on a piece of bipartisan legislation, which I have been working on, and I know Chairman McKeon did his very best to try and push forth a piece of legislation called TBI Treatment Act, H.R. 396, which is an effort I've been working on for the last 8 or 9 years. I was disappointed to know that there was not agreement from the other body, I've been told. With that said, I had an opportunity to meet with Colonel Miller today, a United States Army medical doctor who came to talk with me about how that progress is taking forth within the military, what they're doing to address the issue, and how they are moving forward really in what I characterized as a well-run operation to him. I've not been pleased in the past. As a matter of fact, I've engaged a number of people all the way to the top, and I've not been happy with the response that I've received from the military, and thus the legislation. Today's meeting went very well. I will tell you that TBI, traumatic brain injury, continues to be a source of irritation, as I know you are very well of, as well as Chairman Miller of the Veterans Committee, about the will of the United States military and the will of the United States Congress to get closer to an answer for the men and women of the military who, while in service to this country, engage themselves in activities where they have explosions. So I want you to know that I will continue to work with you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know what the future of this entire endeavor is going to be, except that I believe the Army is now presenting themselves properly, and I'll see what happens. With that said, I'd like to reserve judgment with you about that, with the knowledge that I will stay after it may come after you next year, because the American people in this Congress, I think, need better answers, and we'll see what happens. So, that said, Colonel Miller did a great job with me today. His professional conduct as well as his long-term vision is something we spoke of, and I intend to stay after this as long as I'm a member of Congress. Appreciate the great work that you both do. I will be supportive of the bill. I yield back.
We, as I mentioned, had very limited time to finish up our bill. I think the least amount of time that our committee's ever had before to come up with a final conference was 21 days. We had 7 or 8. So it's been the staff, everybody's worked very, very hard to get this done. What happened on your issue was they didn't have it in the appropriation bill. If we don't have it in both bills, it doesn't go. So we know where we fell short, and I think we'll be able to accomplish that next year.
I want to just add on that Bill Pascrell is also very interested in this issue, and we're trying to work with him to get him that similar briefing. And I think we passed pretty aggressive language on TBI before, and I think some of the frustration has been that the Pentagon has not enforced it. So working on them to make sure they do is a big part of moving forward on this.
I appreciate that, Mr. Smith. In fact, Mr. Praskell and Mr. Platts from Pennsylvania, I should have been more magnanimous in my appreciation of their leadership, along with mine, to try and move this forward. And thank you for mentioning Mr. Praskell, who is a very dear friend and has been a vocal and strong advocate, as well as Mr. Platts, on this issue. And thank you very much. I think many other members too, but these two members in particular have gone out of their way to ensure that the discussion took place that would take us where we are. So I'm here to report to you, as you are today, the Army has stepped up to the plate, and I'll give them every reason to deliver that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have any questions, but I want to take the opportunity to thank Mr. McKeon for what you did on sexual assault in the military. I had an opportunity to thank Mr. Smith earlier today. I've been working on that since 1997, and you really came through for us, I think, in this. I'm very pleased with that, and thank you very much on behalf of all the people who have been so aggrieved by this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'd like to thank the Chairman and the Ranking Member for being here today. I learned about, and this is not completely relevant to what we're talking about here today, but I want to make sure you've heard about it. I heard on the news about 3 weeks ago about an organization called Luke's Wings, and it's an all-volunteer organization that raises money to bring the families of wounded warriors to where the wounded warriors are. And it got its name from a wounded service person whose name was Luke, and another person who's involved with the organization whose last name begins with the word wing. And they, the chairman of the group is in Maryland. He has a full-time job. He does this on the side. They were on Fox News Sunday show this past Sunday, and I did a short speech about them this morning during morning hour. I think it's one of the finer movements that we have going these days. As I said, they're all volunteers. All the money they raise goes into buying tickets for the family members to come to where the wounded military person is, or during the holidays they're trying to get military people home. And I just wanted you to be aware of this organization. It appears to me they're doing great work. As you and I know, there are a lot of groups out there that say they're raising money for the troops and for veterans, and most of the money goes into administration of their programs. It keeps them going. But this seems to be a true volunteer organization, and I think it's wonderful what they're doing. I don't think we do enough to take care of those who get wounded. I think there are big gaps in our programs there, and I'd like to see more done in that area. But until we can do more, I think it's great that we have volunteers who are willing to do it. This is the number one role of the federal government, as I say often in talks that I give to people, the defense of this nation. And I appreciate the fact that we have such good people serving on the Armed Services Committee who understand that and are willing to put their energy into providing. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank both of you for your work on the bill. There are a lot of good things in this bill, but I continue to worry about what seems like an endless involvement in this war in Afghanistan. That's no surprise to anyone here. And I guess I've been told that the language that Senator Merkley had proposed, that I think in a very minor but yet important way would have encouraged an exit strategy, was not kept in the bill. And I get to, I worry that long after all of us are gone from here, people are still going to be debating this war in Afghanistan. Ambassador Crocker last week in the newspapers said that beyond 2014 that we're open to staying as long as the Afghan people want us. and then you read these articles about President Karzai, who is one of the most corrupt leaders in the world, who we're now supporting, blaming corruption in this country on people in the United States. I mean, at some point, enough is enough. And I'm frustrated because I think the American people want this war to come to an end, but our government keeps it going. And, I mean, there's lots of good stuff in this bill. I just, for someone who believes that this war needs to be brought to an end, it just presents a dilemma for me in terms of how I'll finally vote. But but this, again, as our ranking member, Ms. Slaughter, said, that there's great language in here dealing with the sexual assault issue. There's a lot of other good stuff in here, but I think some of us just feel that we need to be heard on this issue because it goes on and on and on and on. And you've been over there, I've been over there. I guess I get a different impression than some of the members who continue to support this war, but it's bankrupting us on top of everything else. We're not paying for most of it. And I applaud you for getting this thing done in record time, but this war continues to be a deep concern of mine, and I don't see any end in sight, and that worries me deeply. So, thank you.
And just for the record, I supported the language, supported your amendment, but the entire bill wasn't completely bipartisan, so there was insistence from the Senate, even from the Republican side, and the amendment had been defeated in the House narrowly. Right. But I sympathize with those remarks, but that's one where we had a difference of opinion.
Right. Thank you.
Mr. Bishop.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, I appreciate you both being here. I think this committee has been far too easy on you so far, so I want to try and remedy that in some slight way. I do want, though, to mention that you said earlier that this is a very bipartisan committee. When I was first here with Chairman Hunter, when it flipped, Chairman Skelton, then this time, this committee was truly a pleasure. And I also want to shout out to both of your staffs, because if it was Ike's and Aaron Connaughton, or whether it was Mr. Simmons back there, everyone has been extremely helpful to both sides of the aisles. It truly is one of those committees that is a joy and a privilege on which to serve. And just remember I'm only on a leave from you guys, so keep the seat warm somewhere in there. I do have 3 questions, and if I can remember them all, then I'm past the dementia stage and I'm eligible to be a presidential candidate. So the first one...
It is a low bar.
Say what? EPA. The first one, in any way, there was an article that came out in one of the publications about earmarks that came from the Senate. I guess I'm out echoing what Elsie says about our friends in the Senate. They appear to have plenty of time, since they're not really passing a whole lot of stuff, to do this type of research. But I also, when I see that, I sometimes question the methodology. I know in years past, certain groups, if, for example, I thought we needed a new cargo plane or a new tanker, if the President also agreed, that was okay. If the President didn't agree, that became an earmark. So I was wondering if some of you could simply say your version of whether there are earmarks in this bill, or if the definition is a little bit scawampus in some ways. Chairman? No earmarks in the bill.
Yeah, there are no earmarks in the bill. There are no earmarks in the House bill, for that matter. But it seems to me that what happens is, whatever the definition of earmarks is, we meet it, and then someone comes up with a new definition in order to argue that there's earmarks. I mean, at a certain point, Congress has to have some say, as you described. I mean, otherwise, we just accept the President's budget, and we don't do our job at all. Just whatever the President's budget is, well, I guess we just rubber stamp it and call it good. I think both, when the Democrats were in charge and Republicans in charge, we have taken steps to clear up, prohibit some of the practices that people found objectionable about the way earmarks were done, to the point where we have a very fair, open, transparent process. And no matter what we do, they keep pulling it back. So we receded to the Senate's definition of earmarks and pulled out what we had put in there that, again, we didn't think were earmarks. So I don't think that's an issue at all. I don't think it was an issue in the House bill, and it's certainly not an issue in the conference report.
I appreciate that clarification. I think obviously when dealing with defense issues, no one really pulls a program out of thin air. If the defense has not planned ahead for it, basically you don't go in that direction. I appreciate that.
I also am somewhat concerned, issue 2, with the direction in which we are going just as far as our military forces are. It's one of the few core constitutional responsibilities we have. And I do note with some concern that the Army will be the smallest we've ever had since World War II. The Navy, let's face it, if you have a Navy, you've got to have a boat. It'll be the smallest since World War I, and the Air Force will be the smallest ever. If you have an Air Force, you've got to have a plane. I am somewhat concerned with those particular trends, and I hope the committee is aware also that it presents a unique challenge to the military if our acquisition of new programs starts to diminish, and I think the budgetary restraints will show that it does. That puts a new emphasis and a new requirement on the sustainment side of our equation. You got to fix those planes and fix those boats that are flying at 150% of their design capacity right now. So a new emphasis on maintenance. This is not an issue in which you dwell, and when the appropriators come here, I will ask this question. Because obviously the Air Force has come up with a new organization scheme for the Air Logistics Center, which in my estimation does a great deal of serious potential harm on the maintenance side. But the Air Force keeps telling me that the reason they did that, and the only reason that they did that, was that they were on a mandate that they had to fire people. They had to cut jobs. So, Mr. Chairman, if I could ask you, not just the $300 billion that was required of the defense effort a couple of years ago, but the $500 billion that was required by this administration, and if rescission goes through, another $500 billion will be required. What is the impact on especially civilian workforce employment in the area of defense? Let's just do with the first $500 billion, which I know you guys from the outset said you had to accommodate in some way. Do you have any idea what that will do to jobs that are presently there in the military, or in defense, civilian as well as military jobs?
This has come in several different forms. It started with Secretary Gates over a year ago asking the chiefs to find $100 billion in efficiencies. Mm-hmm. And that has just started moving through now. The Air Force has found 16,500 positions, 12 already named, 4,500 that will be named right after the first of the year. The Marines have already cut back. The Army is cut back. So that the chiefs found the $100 billion, and Secretary told them they would be able to keep that money for more important things. Then when they did it, he said, well, you'll be able to keep $74 billion of it, and 26 goes for must-pay things. And while he was doing that, he found another $78 billion in cuts that they could make. And then the President gave a speech and said we had to cut another $400 billion out of defense. I met with Chairman Mullen, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, just before he retired, and he said he had been given the responsibility and had told the chiefs that they had to come up with $465 billion in savings. We had a meeting last week, the Big Eight, with Secretary Panetta, and it's actually $489 billion, and that will move into our next year's budget process. So that will be cut over the next 10 years. The military goes out 5 years, so it's like I think $232 billion over the next 5 years. We don't have details yet as to what that will be, but we've had the staff look at it. We held hearings during September and October. We had 6 hearings as to what the effect of that would be on the military. We had the former chiefs. We had the secretary and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, current. We had former chairman of this committee in the House and Senate. We had outside experts. And they gave us a pretty gloomy picture of what those cuts would have, the effect they would have on the military, but they said they would be able to sustain those cuts, and they're moving forward on that. And they've had several months now to plan so as to cause the least harm of those different cuts. On top of that, current law says that because the super committee weren't able to come to agreement on their assignment, we have another $500-600 billion hanging over our heads that kicks in a year from January. And some people are saying, well, we don't have to really worry too much about that. It's not till January. Well, that falls just into the next year's budgeting. So the $489 billion that we'll be budgeting for this spring when we pass our budget, that budget starts October 1st of next year. And so 3 months later, the sequestration kicks in. So I know Secretary Panetta is kind of just ignoring it right now, thinking that that it just can't happen. But the military isn't, and they're already making steps. I was visiting with.
But Mr. McKeon, and if I can get back here to where I need to go.
I'm going to eventually answer your question.
Okay, never mind then. Keep going then.
But this is all really important because I don't think the American people understand how much we're really cutting into the military. So if you go to the first tranche, the $489 billion, we estimate that will be about 100,000 jobs out of the military, uniformed military, mostly out of the Army and the Marines, and about 100 to 200,000 out of civilian military, and then out of the defense contractors, those who build the things that our military uses to fight, about another 500 plus. So we're looking at about between 700,000 and 800,000 jobs. We did one more hearing that was 3 economists that just talked about the impact on the economy. If the second tranche or the sequestration hits the other 500 or 600 billion, that would take those total jobs up to about 1.5 million.
I appreciate you walking me through that and making me slow down in this because it's one of those things I find significant. We are talking a lot about creating jobs. We need to create jobs.
Right.
There are some people who want to create government jobs. Well, let's create more government jobs. If we're talking about the cuts on this area, which is our core constitutional responsibility, there are very few things Congress has to do. This is one which is clearly our responsibility. And we're talking about going forward with a budget which has the potential of losing 100,000 uniforms from the system, and 100 to 200 to 500 to 1 million civilian positions. We're not talking about simply creating jobs. We're talking about people who already have jobs that we're going to put out on the street sometime very near in the future. I think this is a significant issue, and we have to realize the impact of these issues that we have. And sometimes it seems strange that we talk so much about our need to create jobs, and we don't realize that this is going to have a negative impact on the effort to create jobs. And that, indeed, not only are these people who currently have jobs going to lose those, they do a vital function. That's why I also prefaced it with, indeed, we can't just meet those cuts by not having an extra tank or cutting a plane here or there. And it means our equipment is going to get older, and that means the maintenance of that equipment, which is done by the civilian employees, is going to be even more critical in the future for the defense of this country and protection of our troops. I think that's a significant issue, and I think we need to emphasize that that is the real human result of the cuts that we are making in the Department of Defense. And that's where we end up. That's where we have to end up, because there is no other place to go, and I find that very sad. So I appreciate you outlining that for me.
Well, one of the problems that we've seen is defense accounts for 20% of the budget. But on the first tranche of cuts, the $1 billion that we voted for in the deficit reduction, the defense accounted for half of it. And so if you wiped out the whole Defense Department, or if you eliminated the whole discretionary budget, we would still be running a $500 billion a year deficit. And that was unfortunately unable to be taken care of or approached or even baby steps made by the special committee. But that's the thing that's hanging over all of our heads.
Since I do have a sustainment base in my district, there are some people that say I'm simply talking about saving jobs. I am. But in addition to these jobs, I'm talking about the impact on the defense of this nation. There is something more significant and detailed. The two go strictly together. You can't maintain the defense of this nation in the future without some of those personnel that we have. And to lose them is going to be very sad, not just for them, but for the overall impact it has on the country. And I thank you for your time and your effort, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I listened very intently to my good friend from Utah, and I would just offer, I agree with virtually everything he said, but I would take exception when we talk about the military. We talk as if the military are not, the persons employed there are not government employees. And they are government employees too. And so then we turn around and we address staff here in Congress. We cut our own staffs, and perhaps with good currency, but the concern that I have is those are jobs of government workers also. So to address the subject, Mr. McKeon and Mr. Smith have done an extraordinary job, and I appreciate both of them with the constraints that they've had. I appreciate you, Buck, by beginning here and saying that you came here with your partner. We don't always have that, although I do agree that more and more the committee members, chair and ranking members, do seem to be getting on fairly well. I do have a real concern that I'm sure that you have addressed, and that is defense contractors and no-bid contracts. Remember now, I didn't serve on Armed Services or the Veterans Affairs Committee, but I did serve on the Intelligence Committee over a period of 10 years, some portion of that time with Mr. Smith. So I'm a little bit familiar with some contracting efforts. There are two things, one that all of us will remember, and that's the famous cost for a coffee pot and a toilet seat that cost such a large amount of money. One totally unrelated that still bugs me is why I'm in a hospital and I pay $9 for a Tylenol, and I just can't make that compute. And I ask them before I go to the hospital, can I bring my own Tylenol? You know, because I don't understand it. My question that I have for both of you is, in reviewing contractor work, put this in the context of one analogy that I intend to offer, or one anecdote. I'm on an airplane going to Fort Lauderdale about 4 years ago, and a gentleman who was, I learned later, a defense contractor, was talking on the telephone before we took off. I only heard one portion of his conversation. He was evidently, having been here in Washington, this was on a Friday, and he was going back home. He was pretty tired, and he was talking with his counterpart, saying, well, what did they finally agree to? And the next thing I heard him say, he said, but we asked for $25 million. And then they talked about something else, and he said, and so we wind up with $18 million. And then cavalierly, he said at some point in the conversation, well, we'll still make $6 million. Now, I don't understand that. I don't understand. Here's a guy that went into a deal for $25 million, came out with $18 million, and I'm sitting next to him. I didn't know he was a defense contractor when I overheard the first portion of his conversation. But here he is. He's going, his company, whatever it is, they're going to make $6 million. How much of that do you all run into? How much do you run into of what does it cost? In this committee, I'm fond of making the argument, I will support every soldier, every wounded veteran, everybody that is in the military fighting for our freedom and our safety. But I'll be ding-dong if I will be supportive of generals, supporting generals who are supported by captains, who are supported by lieutenants at the Pentagon. I have a lot of trouble with that. Now, I don't understand how we can't find the waste in contracting. Did you address that subject in your many hearings?
If I may, just a starting point, we last year, under the work of Mr. Andrews on our side and Mr. Conaway on the Republican side, put together an acquisition reform policy, and there is considerable frustration about contracts that have gotten out of control. And we addressed a couple of them in the conference committee. We have put in place a firm fixed price contract from Lot 6 forward for the F-35, which has been just an explosion of cost overruns in a variety of different places. We have come up with ways to hold contractors accountable for counterfeit parts that they put into their supply chain and then sell to us. But the acquisition reform, one of the big goals of that legislation was to try to get at this contractor problem. And we've got a contract on a particular missile defense system that just frankly is unbelievable that it was negotiated, that we're now trying to figure out how to get out of because the product isn't working. And if the product isn't working, why are we paying them? It doesn't seem to me to make a lot of sense. So we have addressed that in a variety of different ways. It's a major challenge. We have to make sure we have the people over at the Pentagon who are empowered to make the right decisions, who make the right decisions, and then we exercise oversight. But there's an enormous amount of money that we spend on these things that we should not be spending. We've addressed it in a variety of different ways.
Well, I appreciate it very much. I won't burden Mr. McKeon with a response. You've satisfied me. In addition thereto, I would like to thank you, Mr. Smith, for your presentation at the Democratic caucus today. A colleague of mine and yours and ours sitting next to me said one thing I like about Adam is he knows his bill. And I told him I readily understand that, and I would say the same thing for Mr. McKeon. Thank you both.
Thanks, Elsie.
Thank you.
Appreciate the gentleman's comments. That's my locker mate down the gym, too, so I speak well of him also. Adam, I'll find many good things to say about you.
Thanks, Pete.
So delighted that you're here today. Mr. Woodall?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, my question is about Section 1021 and some of the detainee provisions. This is my first year in Congress, but I remember the melee after 9/11 on Capitol Hill as folks were trying to balance security and liberty. And my recollection is, in that passage of the Patriot Act, folks said, we know we're going to err on the side of taking too much liberty in the name of finding more security, but we're going to sunset these provisions to make sure that they don't harm liberty over the long term. When I look at Section 1021, titled Affirmation of Authority of the Armed Forces of the United States to Detain Covered Persons, it says, nothing in this section shall be construed to affect existing law or authorities relating to the detention of United States citizens, lawful resident aliens of the United States, or any other persons who are captured or arrested in the United States. What struck me about that is it said nothing in this section shall be construed to affect existing law, as opposed to nothing in this section shall apply to United States citizens, resident aliens, or other persons arrested in the United States. There's a good reason I picked the Rules Committee instead of the Judiciary Committee to spend my hours on, but I would have said that there are those who would argue that current law does give the President the authority to detain U.S. citizens.
Can I take a stab at that?
Please do.
First of all, that is quite possible. And in fact, there was a case in the Hamdi decision, 05-06 issue, was a U.S. citizen who was detained by the U.S. military. And the Fourth Circuit upheld that authority. Now, that did not go to the Supreme Court. Mr. Hamdi was quickly transferred to civilian court and tried as civilian, so they didn't carry it out over an extended period of time. But that was what the court upheld. It was not our intention to weigh into that debate because it's frankly prickly on both sides. I will, however, remind you that one of the biggest changes since 9/11, post 9/11 when Guantanamo Bay was created, part of the reason it was created was the theory that because it wasn't within the actual United States, they could get out from under habeas. And that was the position of the Bush administration, that habeas did not apply. Well, the court overturned that. Habeas applies. Nobody, frankly, U.S. citizen or non-U.S. citizen, can be held with military detention without getting their day in court. Now, this legislation also, if you go further into it, even those people who don't win their habeas case and are held will have periodic efforts to have that reviewed. we place those situations, we take care of that situation. But if you're talking about whether or not a U.S. citizen is capable of being an enemy combatant, capable of being allied with al-Qaeda and the Taliban, and therefore applying more under the law of war instead of under normal criminal jurisdiction, I kind of think that's at least possible. Now, we put all kinds of protections and provisions in here, but I think a blanket ban that says you can't treat someone who's a U.S. citizen as, a law of war person. I mean, Anwar al-Awlaki, who was planning those attacks against us from Yemen, is a United States citizen. And he was doing exactly what Osama bin Laden and Zawahiri and a bunch of others were doing. And I don't want to blanket say, nope, you gotta arrest him, you gotta give him Miranda, you gotta go through the normal criminal law procedure because of that. But we don't weigh into that debate here because, as you might imagine, it's a fairly contested debate. We allow existing law to stand, how the courts have interpreted and how the executive branch have interpreted it. So that's how we tried not to upset that apple cart.
Just to make sure I understand, when you talk about all the protections and checks and balances that go into that process, it's the exact same protections and checks and balances for a non-citizen that are there for a citizen. There is no language in here that provides U.S. citizens with any degree of protection.
That's not actually true, and it depends on how you construct things. You mentioned Section 1021. If you go to 1022, which talks about military detention, and it excludes U.S. citizens and lawful resident aliens. It says nothing in this subsection shall apply to them. So it does sort of make it clear that we do not intend for military detention of U.S. citizens in the United States. So there is that protection, and arguably, from the perspective you're coming from, that offers a slightly greater protection for U.S. citizens than current law does.
Mr. Chairman, do you share that?
Yes. Page 657 in 1022 says United States citizens, the requirement to detain a person in military custody under this section does not extend to citizens of the United States. This is something that we've talked about for a long time. One of the things, we got into detention and we got into the authority to go after terrorists. After 9/11, we gave the President the authority to go after terrorists. But for 10 years, that has not been updated or modernized at all. And conditions in the world have changed. For instance, our biggest problem right now is probably al-Qaeda, Arabian Peninsula. And they're not even mentioned in that original authority. So we went through and updated according to what court decisions have been rendered since then. We didn't change any, but the concern was that courts can change, and we should codify the rulings that they've made. And that's basically what we do in the authority. And then the detainees, he's an attorney, and he really gets into the weeds on this stuff. And we've had long debates and discussions, and I think we feel very comfortable with where we are now in the bill.
When Mr. Smith talks about not wading into these issues, if not an NDAA, what is the proper forum for wading in? Is this a Judiciary Committee?
If I may, I mentioned one specific aspect of the issue. The whole reason we're doing this is because we do believe that Congress should speak. Now, I kind of went back and forth on that because I agree completely that the legislative branch needs to assert itself in these matters and should do so in the NDAA. On the other hand, I can't use the phrase here in a public hearing that I know of, it's an extraordinarily difficult thing to do. And doing so jeopardized the whole rest of our work product. So I was a little nervous about doing it just because of the controversy attached to it. But I can tell you House, Senate, Republican, we did an enormous amount of work to come up with something that I think is a proper balance that reflects what I think should be the policy and puts it into place. So no, don't misunderstand me. I was saying the one specific issue about U.S. citizens and the whole Hamdi decision, all that. But the issue of AUMF and detainee policy, absolutely. Congress, and this committee is the appropriate place to have that discussion.
Well, I will echo the comments of my colleagues that it is certainly nice to see folks working cooperatively towards common ends that we all worry about as Americans and worry about the security of this country. And I thank you both for time to answer my questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Polis?
I share some of the concerns that my friend from Georgia brought up regarding U.S. citizens losing many of their constitutional rights, effectively militarizing justice. I mean, have there been incidences where American citizens have attacked America or caused us harm when they had been released because there weren't charges against them? I mean, is this in response to something that habeas corpus would be suspended?
Oh, habeas corpus is not being suspended.
I thought they could be held without charge, definitely.
No.
They have to be charged?
There has to be habeas corpus. Now, that you're talking about two different things.
Sure.
There is the possibility of indefinite detention without a normal criminal charge. But even if you do that, which the President Obama himself has said, that's not our preference, we don't want to do that, but in certain isolated circumstances it may be necessary under law of war. Even if you do that, habeas still applies, which means you have to have a hearing in front of a federal judge to, make your case under the law for why you have the right to detain this person. And to do that, you have to show their connection to al-Qaeda and the Taliban, and you have to show their threat that they present. So habeas applies to
I mean, if those things exist, why isn't there a criminal charge that can be made? I mean, if somebody has has an active threat to cause America harm, it doesn't need to be in this fuzzy category. There's a criminal charge there.
Because there are times when the evidence isn't available. Keep in mind that the principle of our criminal justice system, and I think it's perfectly appropriate, is the old cliche, better 100 people should go free who are guilty than one innocent go to prison. The same doesn't necessarily apply in a law of war context. And maybe you can't prove the case. Maybe the intelligence that you have was gathered in a way that wasn't in keeping with Miranda and the Fourth, Fifth, and all the other stuff that might get thrown out in court, and you won't have enough evidence to present to actually criminally prosecute this person. But they are unquestionably a threat. In that situation, in that isolated set of circumstances, what both the Obama administration and the Bush administration and a whole lot of other folks have said, you need that option of indefinite detention.
I mean, has this come up where people have been let go and then subsequently caused harm?
Absolutely. You limited it to U.S. citizens earlier, but there were a fair number of people.
Limited to U.S. citizens.
A fair number of people in the Bush administration, I don't believe any of them were U.S. citizens, and also in Obama, people who were let go from Guantanamo because we didn't have adequate evidence to prosecute them who returned to the battlefield. I mean,
Is it possible that they were perhaps radicalized by their experience in Guantanamo?
That's possible.
And exited more likely to desire to do this country harm?
That's certainly possible, but I would be real surprised if there weren't at least a few of them who we just simply couldn't prove what was there, and they went back to doing what they were doing before just because we couldn't prove it.
I mean, these sorts of things, in addition to, our values as Americans, they threaten to further radicalize any that are wrongly charged along with their friends and associates under them.
Well, that can happen in a criminal justice system, too. I mean, that isn't limited just to indefinite detention.
Yeah, in criminal justice system, while there's not universal confidence, at least there's broad confidence that you get a fair process, a hearing, what laws you're being held to account for.
Which is why in the overwhelming majority of cases, that's where we want to go. And that's a fight and an argument that I've had to say that we shouldn't be emphasizing too much the military option or indefinite detention. We should keep open.
So do you expect
we do that.
Do you expect this to be used rarely at all?
Rarely. And this is existing law. Keep in mind, this has been going on.
How often, I guess I would address this to both of you, how often would its use have to occur to cause your concern with this power?
It's not so much how often as it would be the instances. Now, I'd have to go back and check, but I'm trying to think during the course of the Obama administration if anybody that we've captured in that time frame has gone into indefinite detention. There are some who are holdovers from indefinite detention, but most of them at this point have been tried either through a military commission or through the normal criminal.
And we are differentiating, again, American citizens versus non-citizens as well.
Yeah, at this point.
Maybe I could ask the Chair, Mr. McKeon, I mean, how often do you feel that this should be used, and what type of usage would cause your concern and you to re-examine this authority?
I appreciate your concerns. I don't think it's been used that many times. Fortunately, the vast majority of U.S. citizens aren't willing or aren't trying to take down this government. I'm also, though, very concerned, and what I would really be concerned about is if we had had many major attacks on our homeland since 9/11. I think our law enforcement, our military have done an excellent job of protecting us, and I want them to keep doing it. So I think what we're trying to do is give them the tools that they need within bounds, within limits, to protect us. That's their job, and that's our job, is to help them do that.
And where U.S. citizens are concerned, I should point out, this hasn't been used at all, to my knowledge. Correct me, but there have been 2 cases where briefly they were held in this and then quickly transferred over to the normal criminal justice process. So against U.S. citizens, it hasn't been held at all. A lot of nodding heads behind me, so we'll go with that.
Thank you. I'll yield back.
Thank you very much. Mr. Nugent?
Well, first of all, I want to thank both of you for working as hard as you have in a cooperative way. It's a good thing, particularly when we're talking about the defense of our nation. As we move through, there's been a lot of discussion in regards to detainees, and I think, Mr. Smith really hit it on the head in regards to there's only really been 2 instances or less, or maybe a couple more, as it relates to American citizens, and particularly in regards to how they're dealt with under law. So that makes me feel good. As a former law enforcement officer, there is a difference between a foreign citizen, obviously trying to do harm against America, versus an American citizen that is doing it, and there's due process, there's all those things. And so, the Justice Department and the military, I think, should be commended on that. One of the things that concerns me, obviously, is as we move forward in regards to detainees and the ability as under law as to how we treat detainees, and more importantly is how we protect America. And so I want to congratulate both of you working in I believe, a bipartisan way to make Americans safer. I have a personal stake in this because I have 3 sons that are currently serving in the United States military. So I appreciate all that you do in keeping them and their brothers in arms and sisters in arms safe. And I want to commend you for working in a bipartisan way to make sure that America stays safe and against all aggressors. So I want to thank you again for both of your work in that area. Thank you.
Mr. Scott? Mr. Webster?
Gentlemen, thank you very much, not only for your time today, but your thoughtful consideration to artfully answer not just the questions that you had placed to you by this committee, but perhaps more importantly, the spirit by which you conducted yourself throughout this year in the endeavor to make sure that the members of the military, as well as this body, have a constant ability to talk with you about their ideas, their concerns. I know that I engage the committee on a regular basis. I also, on behalf of the committee and the young gentleman from California, Mr. Dreyer, would want to express to your staff, both your staffs, the appreciation of this committee for working with us, preparing this committee for your arrival today, working with them on the amendments that would be offered, and the high level of respect and appreciation that they share for each other on a professional basis from the staff basis. So if you would please express to your staff from the top to the bottom our appreciation for you, and you're dismissed at this time.
Thank you.
The committee will be in recess for 30 seconds, please.
Committee reconvenes, and I couldn't have said it better myself. That will conclude the hearing, and the chair will be in receipt of a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee grant a rule providing for consideration of the conference report accompanying H.R. 1540, the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2012. Rule waives all points for or against the conference report and its consideration. Rule provides that the conference report shall be considered as read. Rule provides that the previous question shall be considered as ordered without intervention of any motion except 1 hour debate and 1 motion to recommit if applicable. Section 2 of the rule provides that it shall be in order at any time through the remainder of the first session of the 112th Congress for the Speaker to entertain motions that the House suspend the rules as though under Clause 1, Part C of Rule 15, if the text of the measure proposed in a motion is made available on the calendar day before consideration. Section 3 of the rule provides that on any legislative day of the first session of the 112th Congress after December 16, 2011, 1, the journal of the proceedings of the previous day shall be considered as approved. 2, the chair may at any time declare the House adjourned to meet at a date and time within the limits of Clause 4, Section 5, Article 1 of the Constitution be announced by the chair in declaring the adjournment. And 3, bills and resolutions introduced during the period addressed by this section shall be numbered, listed in the congressional record, and when printed shall bear the date of introduction, but may be referred to the Speaker at a later time. Section 4 of the rule provides that on any legislative day of the second session of the 112th Congress before January 17, 2012, number 1, the Speaker may dispense with organization and legislative business. Number 2, the journal of the proceedings of the previous day shall be considered as approved if applicable. And number 3, the chair may at any time may declare the House adjourned to meet at a date and time within the limits of Clause 4, Section 5, Article 1 of the Constitution to be announced by the chair in declaring the adjournment. Finally, Section 5 of the rule authorizes the Speaker to appoint members to perform duties of the chair for the duration of the period addressed by Sections 3 and 4 as though under Clause 8A of Rule 1.
You've heard the motion of the gentleman. Let me just explain briefly. This is the standard rule for consideration of a conference report for us to bring up the defense authorization bill, as you know. And as Mr. Sessions has just said, this rule will extend the suspension authority through this session of Congress. We hope very much it comes to an end very quickly. We hope by the end of this week. And, of course, we do guarantee that we will provide 1 day prior to consideration of a measure under suspension. And as my colleagues know very well, any measure that would be considered under suspension has to be successful, have a strong bipartisan, a 2/3 vote is required. So obviously any measure that would be considered and pass the House under suspension would have to be a bipartisan measure. And it, of course, includes the authority for the Speaker to proceed with pro forma sessions until we resume business in January. Are there any amendments to the rule? Ms.
Yes,
Slaughter.
thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. We've gotten a number of inquiries in our office about the conference report. Under the rules, a member of the opposition will get a third of the time. Is that correct?
That's absolutely right.
That's good to know. And second, because of the extraneous matters in this resolution that we weren't prepared to see, I'm going to recommend that my side vote no until we have an opportunity to study those and see what they mean.
Well, I mean, I'm happy to go through and give a further explanation. I mean, I don't really consider them extraneous. They're housekeeping measures that as we wind down the session, I mean, this has gone on, under both majorities, as everyone knows. So I'm just saying that I think that they're pretty clear as I've explained them. I mean, it grants suspension authority. Well, if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? We don't know that there are questions yet. We'd like to have some time to look at it.
Okay. Well, certainly that's obviously your prerogative. So the vote occurs on the motion of the gentleman from Dallas. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no. Paying the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. Clerk, call the roll.
Aye.
Ms. Fox. Aye. Ms. Fox. Aye. Mr. Bishop. Aye. Mr. Bishop. Aye. Mr. Woodall. Aye. Mr. Woodall. Aye. Mr. Nugent. Aye. Mr. Nugent. Aye. Mr. Scott. Aye. Mr. Scott. Aye. Mr. Webster. Mr. Webster. Aye. Ms. Slaughter.
No.
Ms. Slaughter, no. Mr. McGovern. Mr. Hastings? No. Mr. Hastings, no. Mr. Polis? No. Polis, no. Mr. Chairman?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, aye.
And the clerk report the total.
8 yeas, 4 nays.
And the motion is agreed to, and Mr. Bishop will be managing this measure for the majority.
Mr. Hastings for the minority.
And let me just say that we don't have any more meetings scheduled for this week, but of course we are hoping very much that we will see a conference report on the continuing on the minibus appropriation bill. We hope that our Senate colleagues will sign the measure. It again has enjoyed strong bipartisan support. It was negotiated with both the House and the Senate and the White House, and I hope that we'll be able to consider that just as quickly as possible. And as soon as that report is signed and filed and made available, we will proceed with announcing a meeting time for this committee. So without objection, the committee stands adjourned.